Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of the Cheeky Natives. We're coming to you live from Live Literature Market. We've got a special guest today who's flown in all the way from the Republic to be part of this podcast. We're so excited to invite him, to have him on the podcast. It's been a long time coming. Welcome, Mphuthumi, Ntabeni. How are you?
Thank you very much for having me. I'm good, and at least Joburg is warmer than Cape Town.
I mean, that could be metaphorical, right? It's warmer than Joburg.
I myself, I'm saying it metaphorically in every sense.
So it's like a hobby of mine to read blurbs, and I just want to read this blurb. Mphuthumi Ntabeni has written a stellar novel on the epic struggle for land between the Xhosas and the British in the 19th century. It's seen through the eyes of a contemporary Pila who minds the mind of Maqoma, the chief at the center of Xhosa resistance then. From their engagements is born a unique chronicle that interrogates history through current events, where Ubuqaba, which is the rawness of Xhosa culture, confronts Western civilization, and where African and Christian religions collide in the middle in strength and exposure of their weakness. Mphuthumi, you wrote The Broken River Tent. An epic novel, really, and in many ways it's quite interesting because this is a genre of African historical fiction that is coming to the fore in many ways. So I have so many questions, and I have feelings about so many people in this, and I'm sure which is like many people. So tell me, why did you write The Broken River Tent in the way that you did, right? So you wrote it as this African historical fiction where you had Pila, who's like a modern day young black man in South Africa, having a conversation with a Xhosa chief who was part of the resistance against the British. Such an interesting contrast to set up. Why?
Thank you for the compliment, Salma. First of all, the thing I wanted to do in the Broken River Tent was not to tell the history. I wanted to resurrect it. I wanted to, when a person is reading it, you feel like you are talking to your grandfather, who somehow is your ancestor. And when I first draft in particular, this is the first time I'm revealing this. On my first draft, I had put this as only a Maqoma telling his story. You understand? And then when I finished the draft, I looked at it and I tell myself, no, this is just an excuse for telling history. But I don't want to tell history, I want to live it. And that's how Pila was born in my imagination. So I needed somebody who will ask questions that we in our time are asking. Do you understand? And also I needed somebody who will be a prototype of the historical consequences of what happened during Maqoma's time. So that is why I needed Pila.
So this book is very interesting. I actually wanted to ask you if you felt that, because what happens is Pila meets Maqoma, and he's the only one that can see him. So there's a line where he gets accused of having somatic delusions, which he finds very offensive. But why was that particular interaction sent that way? Was it a commentary on mental illness? Because in many ways, it seems like Upila transverses the spiritual. He transverses spiritual realms. He cuts across so many generational things in order to have this conversation with Maqoma that is also initiated by Maqoma, right?
Yeah.
So why did you write it in that way? And is Pila suffering from a mental illness? What is the angle of those somatic delusions?
Yeah.
Because the doctor and me jumped out.
I know.
I'm like,
I know. I anticipated that. In the Xhosa culture, actually in all African culture, but Xhosa culture in particular, we have this thing we call ukutwasa.
Yes.
So Pila and ukutwasa, us as African people, we don't regard it as an illness. We regard it as somebody who is being made into a medium between the spiritual world and the physical world. And so, for me, this is what is happening to Pila. You understand? But he himself, because he's westernized and educated in a Western kind of thing, he does not know what is happening. And the ancestor in Maqoma is forcing him, is opening his eyes. I needed to explain that to my reader, which is why how Nandi was born. So that a psychologist will interpret it in the language that we know, the Western language. You understand? And so I wanted to put the contrast on it between the African concept of ukutwala and the psychological, psychiatrical, and all that stuff. What is the difference between these things? So I wanted to make a study of it. You would have noticed that while it was Pila was going to on a peak on the thing Yogutwasa, he was going to go and see the ceremony, and even himself perhaps become part of that process. I decided to stop it because I realized that it was becoming it's gonna take too much of the book. The book was getting too big, so it became obvious that this book has to be in 3 parts. So in this first part, I decided, and let's concentrate on the frontier wars on this one, which is why I used my comma and the violence, and then of the frontier wars. And then on the second one, I want to particularly now concentrate on the clash between Western spirituality and African spirituality. And I'm going to use the Usoga. Tio Soga was the first black person to be to be educated as a reverend, you see. So I think, so what will happen is we're still going to see how Upila ends up on that thing, but we're probably going to see it through the Soga book.
Because I think somebody gave Bush my notes for today's podcast, because he conveniently talks about Tio Soga when I have Tio Soga as a talking point, but I can't. It's still all good. I want to the book is set around the frontier wars, right? And it's really interesting to me because Umakoma makes a point to talk about the ways in which history is captured, and how history, for example, conveniently leaves out the stories that are not flattering to it, right? And there's a particularly interesting interactions between the English colonizers and the Xhosa chiefs, right? So there is a commentary on the ways in which the English behaved in almost indecent ways, right? They negotiate in dishonest ways, they have the upper hand, they continuously perpetuate these very violent ways of interacting with the natives, right? And then go on to record sort of historical battles in ways that are not true. And Makoma comes back to make a comment about that. And I thought it was so particularly interesting that in writing about the frontier wars, you concentrated quite a lot on Makoma giving his version of how those battles took place, and what is really quite a historical thing, but in an African historical fiction book, which is fiction, but there's so many historical inaccuracies that you aim to correct.
You've understood this, what I was trying to do, very well. You see, the point of it is this: I first encountered myself this history of the frontier wars in detail when I was in Scotland, because you must remember that during those wars, the soldiers of the British army that came to the Cape Colony were Scottish, and the missionaries that came to the Cape Colony were Scottish. You understand? So you find all these details on the Scottish archives, especially the Presbyterian Church. You understand? And so when I looked at it, I was like quite blown out of my mind about all this history. And I'm thinking, why did I never heard of this? You understand? Why did I never heard of it? But then when I was finished with it, the first thing I said, but there's a lot of history about Amaxhosa here, but there's not a single one that is said from the point of view Yamaxhosa. And I thought to myself, let me try to do this from the point of view Yamaxhosa and see how it's going to happen. You understand? Because it's always the governors, the British officials, the missionaries who are talking here, and they themselves, though they didn't like Makoma, their first their commentaries was always about how brave he was, how not scared of anything, and then how eloquent he was. Everybody was like saying that he was very eloquent and wise. And then when I look in the archives, there is no like a recorded speech of his, which is why I decided let me just reimagine them and see what he would have said. But luckily, though this is historical fiction, I invent nothing. The only thing the character I've invented is that of Pila, so that he can help us. But when it comes to the historical facts, what Makoma is talking about, I invent nothing except the psychological insights, the emotion that came with it. You understand? So if, for instance, I've read that, but on the British Journal, there was a meeting with Chief Makoma and other chiefs and the governor. You understand? So I reimagine myself when they said that this was agreed because they formalized everything. And then now I just imagine now the emotional, which is where the resurrection thing that comes from. And I said, but there is that, I don't know if like I'm a Christian. So I like, there's a passage I like from Ezekiel, when God says to Ezekiel, son of man, can these bones rise? So I was like looking at that, at the bones of my comma, and then I wanted to raise him up so that he comes to our era. And then Pilar would help us ask questions that we would have loved to ask from history.
So there's a recording of the resistance, of the Xhosa resistance in this book, which is not well documented in many places. There's almost a sense in the telling of the story that the British came, they found these uncultured savages, and they brought us to light, and they brought us to education. And you very, very descriptively go about in ways of detailing the resistance. And I want to know if that in itself was an act of archiving. Why did you think that to detail this resistance was so particularly important in what is a fiction novel? Why? Because you spend quite a lot of time discussing the resistance and the ways in which Xhosa people resisted the arrival of the British. They resisted the ways in which the British stole and plundered and pillaged from them.
Yeah, I get irritated these days sometimes when I hear young people are like, oh, our ancestors, they just gave the land to the British. Young people only know the version that was told by the British, and they believe it. They don't know what our ancestors did. And it's not only in the Eastern Cape, it's in the KZN, it's everywhere. Our ancestors resisted. And in the words of Makoma, the only thing is that our fate was too strong against us, because these people had much superior weaponry and all that stuff. But my point is, when you write history, and which is most of the time, history is always written from the point of view of the victors. And now we're trying to correct these things bit by bit. You understand? I'm not a historian, but I have read a lot on this topic. You understand? And then at the end of the day, I told myself that these people not only cheated us once, they cheated us twice and thrice, because now they made us believe that we're inferior by telling the history according to their own point of view. And then I wanted to show our children in particular that we had heroes. So, which is why for me, my comma was inevitable, because the Xhosas, most people don't know that, the Xhosas fought 102 years with the British, and they fought 9 major battles. And so on those 9 major battles, Makama led 5 of them. So it was inevitable that I would use him, because even in the British documents, in the British journals and all that stuff, they are always themselves talking about Makoma. So the material is there. So I also use it, but I use it for our own voice to create the history in the terms that we understand it ourselves as black people, and in particular the Xhosas.
So you used a lot of religious references in this book. There's a lot of Christian religious references, which I found to be very interesting, because in many ways I also found the book to be quite a real criticism of the ways in which Christian missionaries themselves aided and abetted the pillaging and the plunder of African countries, right? So you had the Christian missionaries there sitting in many ways with the generals, and the generals who themselves would then go back and behave in ways that were not in keeping with the agreements that were in place. And I found it so interesting that there was this juxtaposition between very strong Christian religious imagery, but also a real criticism on the ways in which missionaries behaved when they encountered the Xhosa.
You marvel me on how you understand this. It's exactly that. You see, I've already said, because I'm a Christian, my problem is not with Christianity. My problem is with Christendom. You understand? That is the use of the religion of Christianity for imperialistic tendencies.
I want that on a t-shirt. I want Mphuthumi to put that on a t-shirt.
Sure. And then this is why my mom, funny enough, I think my mom misunderstood this book. Because she's a staunch Christian, but she's these born-again Christians. And then the only comment she's ever made about my book after she finishes, she was like, I'm not sure where this thing of yours of being anti-Christian comes from. And I'm like, what do you mean I'm anti-Christian? You understand? It says, but For me, that Makoma is not likable. And I said, but Makoma is an African chief, and you can see even Makoma himself had nothing against God. You understand? And he actually was a believer in God. But he could see that this use of God to take away our resources and land is nonsense. And for that matter, Makoma, which is the chief of Amanweka, were looked down by other Xhosa people because they thought they were selling the land to white people. Makoma was very open to the idea of Western civilization because he could see that, especially with the harvest didn't reach the landers at the cycle, which means that the population was outgrown, was outpacing the way the progressive manner they were planting. So the harvest would not be enough to carry to that cycle. And so Makoma was like, let's learn from these people because they've got all these tricks of irrigation. But then sometimes I don't know if we can say sometimes the customs can work against you. Because like for instance, Amaxhosa will be like, you can't divert a river, that's blasphemy to the ancestors. You understand? And the white people were diverting rivers using furrows to irrigate. You understand? But now, we're in this era. We know what this diverting of the rivers to form artificial dam has done to the climate. Exactly. You understand? So the Xhosas had some wisdom in that. They understood that, but once you divert a river, you change the whole ecosystem, and that's gonna be a problem. And now look at the Eastern Cape. Eastern Cape used to be one of the greenest places, and now there are droughts almost every 5 years, which is strange. And the rivers are dying. All of them now, the rivers that were huge, the Fish River and all that stuff, they're just streamlets now. You understand? Which is fine. So now you say, okay, Western civilization conquered, but at what price? You understand?
So there's an almost interesting analysis, or not even, I want to say there's a conversation that was sparked about culture that I had with my partner that came from reading this book, right? I mean, there are cultural criticisms that you make. So for example, there are very entrenched sort of cultural lines in the book. So when there's the ways in which stronger Xhosa groups look down on what have been traditionally weaker groups, and the ways in which those divisions lay ground for the British to be able to behave in certain ways. Yeah. And I thought it was very interesting because we're having the conversation now around cultural elitism, cultural classism, the ways in which even black people among themselves propagate these very problematic behaviors. Yeah. Yeah. And I thought that it was interesting that you made a juxtaposition between a historical event and what I think is also contemporary events that are happening. And Pila in many ways points to that, to this feeling of there are things about our culture that we must criticize, that cannot be stagnant, that must be evolving. Why did you want to do that in the book?
Well, it's interesting. By the way, I'm Mfengu myself. And then I've gotten the criticism that you really don't like Mfengu, don't you? And I'm like, look, the other people say, but you are a self-loathing Mfengu then. And the point I was trying to do, first of all, the book is written from the Xhosa point of view, Amanweka point of view. Yes. You understand? So I have to be true to the integrity of my character. So I have to stay with Makoma. I can imagine Makoma's feelings because, by the way, I think in the Eastern Cape, the arrival of Amamfengu sparked what today would call a xenophobia. Because there was a lot of xenophobia against Amamfengu. You must remember, we come from KZN. And then we're fleeing from the Mfetsane wars, and we crossed the landers, the rivers, and when we came to the Eastern Cape, we were desolate. We had nothing. And then Amaxhosa used to call us their dogs. We were on the position of being slaves. You understand? So the funny thing is, and I don't know if there was a coincidence, I don't believe in coincidences. Amamfengu arrived in the Eastern Cape almost simultaneously with the white people, with the white settlers. And so when Amamfengu were in the position of being slaves, when the white people came, they saw white people as their saviors. So naturally they aligned themselves with the white people, and they became used by the British. Because there is no way the British could have been able to fight Makoma's guerrilla wars without Amamfengu, because they did not know the landscape of the area and all that stuff. It is Amamfengu who were helping them with that. So this thing is deep-seated in the Eastern Cape, that Amamfengu were sellouts. At that particular history in particular. Because you must remember, Amamfengu took up what we call now Western civilization immediately. And then they learned how to farm, and then they stole even some of the cattle, the Xhosa cattle, and then they ran to the missionaries and became the refugees on the missionaries. And then after the tragedy of Nongawusa, Amamfengu didn't participate in that killing of cattle. And then within 5 years and 6 years or so, Amamfengu rose up as the richest black people in that area. You understand? And you can imagine how resentful Amaxhosa would have been. Because these people only 3 decades ago, they were our slaves, and now they are our masters. And but then, who am I to judge that? Even if I'm not taking the side of the Mfengu, but you must remember, when Amamfengu got educated, they went to school, they went to university, Forte was founded. They are the ones who first resisted now by the pen, and they said the pen was mightier than the sword. And then eventually their organization, they form what we know today as African National Congress. So when you look at history, you cannot look at it in a simplistic way, if you know what I mean.
Yes.
There are complexities, you understand? Because in a way, if had Amamfengu not taken into the Western civilization, into the ways of that culture in intellectual and reading and all that stuff, we probably would have taken us longer to be free in this country, because they are the ones basically who founded the African National Congress, and you know people like Ntabeni and Mfengus themselves.
I want to talk about the complexities of the characters in this book, because no character in this book is incredibly likable, right? And I thought that this was a particularly interesting conversation to have in the wake of some conversations people are having about their own historical figures. We come in a week where there was this uproar about questions around Shaga's sexuality, for example, you know? So you write, Makoma is very problematic in many ways, right? He's deeply, deeply flawed. He battles with things like his mental state, you know. I mean, I was wondering at some point, does Makoma have some mental illness? Does he have a substance abuse problem, you know? And also the ways in which he interacts with the women around him is also very, very problematic. So Pila himself, Pila is trash. Pila is trashy. He is trashy. He is trashy. Pila just made me feel all these things. In many ways, I struggled to associate with Pila because I just felt like he's so trashy, but we'll get into Pila. You write this Xhosa hero who is one of these amazing things, right? And you write Makoma in such a deeply flawed and problematic way. Why did you do that? Were you humanizing what is almost a mythological figure?
That thing you are saying, I was humanizing him. I didn't want to worship him. Yes. Even though he's my hero, but I wanted to show that he had his flaws and major flaws. And other people tend to say that it's the missionaries who painted him in a bad side. No, Makoma in some moments in his life was alcoholic. He could be seen in Fort Beaufort, passed out, and then the whole chief and all that stuff. And I didn't want to dwell on that, but I didn't want to paint over it and put a wallpaper over it, because he also was deeply patriarchal. Of course, it was that time was like that. I mean, he had about 8 wives. You understand? And then to them, wives were just servants to their needs and all those things. So I wanted Pila to ask those questions for us. But then, if you care to know, I think on the second draft and all that stuff, I realized after when I was reading it, or a third draft, I was reading it and I was like, oh, I've made Pila too likable. He needs to have some flaws.
Oh,
yeah. So you understand? But perhaps not too likable, but I had made him too neutral. Yeah. And then he was going to be just a weapon of Makoma, like a medium. And I said, no, he must have his own life. So if he has his own life, we must see his flaws. You understand? But I mean, I think for me, the major flaw of Pila, I wanted to create a character who is world weary. Do you understand that? And that came from personal experience. That thing of you had grown up in a certain culture, and you with an ambition, you thought that if I can break out of this, which is why that scene of the cave, and I'm thinking I wanted, but Upila was always looking forward to break out and live here, understand? And then he found what he wanted to. He went to Europe, he studied, he got all what he wanted, he had money, and then at the end he was still dissatisfied when he came, and because he was realizing now that but he does not really know himself, you understand? So I needed somebody who is world weary, who is disinterested and not committed to anything, you understand? And so I wanted also to invoke the anger of Nandi, because Nandi his fault with Pila is that lack of commitment in anything, you understand?
I want to talk about Pila some more, because Pila is a protagonist in the story.
Yeah.
I thought that Pila in many ways represents a generation of young black people in this country who are what you have spoken about as it relates to historical consequence. So Pila gets this wonderful education, he gets this dream job, but in many ways he's undermined at work, his career prospects are stifled, there's not much really going for him. BE has almost failed him, right? And there's a scene where he's even almost participating, or he's present at a protest where there's a discussion about land and all of these things. And I thought that Pila was an example of the historical consequences of the things that happened in Makoma's time. So all of the dispossession, the fragmentation, the breaking of the family units becomes evidence in Pila's life, and so much of that weariness is a result of that historical consequence.
Perfect. And then he is like, he can see himself, the gulf between him and his own people is almost unbridgeable.
Yeah.
And then he does not want to go where the white culture is calling him to. And then he's like in this no man land.
Yes.
You understand that? And he does not know who he is or where he must go. And then he finds that even now, even the concept of life is too much to bear. He's bored with it. You understand that? And then the only anchor he has in his life is Nandi. But because he's very good in self-sabotaging himself, you understand that he does that even to the person, the only salvation he knows. Because once he's with Nandi, he comes down, he becomes himself, he can look around instead of always self-obsessing, you understand? Because once he's with Nandi, he can laugh, he can look at things, they can think about the past when they were growing up, you understand? But of course, Pila is a master of self-sabotage.
Pila I swear he's got a PhD in self-sabotage, you know? I want to talk about relationships, because as much as this is a historical fiction, it's also quite an interesting study on relationships, right? And the ways in which human interactions have changed but also have stayed the same, you know? So Makoma has his own very problematic ways of relating with women, you know? And so does Pila and Nandi, you know? And I mean, Pila in many ways is just not a present partner. He's not present. He always goes back to Nandi when things have turned south for him, or when he's bored, he goes back to Nandi, you know. But there's a comeuppance that Nandi almost gets at the end of the story, because Pila almost gets a taste of his own medicine, you know.
He actually gets the taste of his own medicine. And it's
great. I enjoyed that. Was my favorite, one of my favorite scenes as it related to Pila. So I want to know why you framed relationships in the way that you did. There was really no great love story in this, except maybe Makoma and his Kacha, you know. But even that doesn't have a great fairy tale ending, you know.
No, you're a very perceptive reader. Look, what I did, as I said, I was trying to humanize Makoma himself. I was thinking to myself, how can I create a love story with somebody who has 8 wives? You understand? and then I think to myself, okay, let me use, because why I chose Kache, first of all, because Kache was a Khoisan woman.
Yes.
And second of all, in his first incarceration in Robben Island, they allowed him one wife and he chose her.
Kache.
So yes. he must have loved her more. Or I like to think he must have loved her more. But there's another notion actually, because Kache had a young child. They had a 6-year-old then. So perhaps that was Makoma's youngest son, and he thought, let me take care of my young child. But yeah, you see the tragedy of her ending also herself. I said actually I make up nothing on this, but I took poetic license there. The wife that was actually killed, Makoma's wife that was actually killed by the British that way I described on the mountain wasn't Kati, it was another wife. But so I was just taking poetic justice, but it does not affect the story in any fatal way. So that's why, because I wanted to show that Makoma could be a romantic himself because he was a human, and he loved. He was poetic, and then these things of his, because they called him Umchongum Sobomv, because every morning he will go to watch the sunrise, and in the evening he will go to see the sunset. So Chongum Sobomv is somebody who, like, the one who watches the luster of the sun. So that is why they call him. So I wanted to romanticize him a little bit because he was a poetic character. Well, as for Pilar and Nandi's character, I mean, and the relationship, first of all, since I'm in a confessional mode, there is something similar that happened in my life. And I have seen in other guys of my relation also a similar thing. So that's why I think it's very common. The people, our first loves, when you look back at it and you think, what happened here? You understand? So I was trying to look back on mine. And my Nandi herself, I think I met her a few months ago when I was giving her this book, and then I asked her. I had known, but she like you, she's a medical doctor, but she specialized in psychiatry. So I asked her, why did you choose psychiatry of all things? And then she said, because of you. And then I decided to leave it at that. So
I want to talk about the woman in this book. I was taken aback almost that the woman, and perhaps this is not the story to do this, but the woman in this book did not feature prominently. So I imagine, and I'm curious about it, there was a lot of strong male figures in this book. There's a very strong tracing of the lineage of Xhosa kings, of chiefs. Even the squabbles among their sons, they feature quite prominently, but the women in the story do not. And I found it interesting that in a book about the resistance and African historical fiction, the women in this book did not come to the forefront, you know, and I mean, it is also quite a period piece, so perhaps that influenced it. But I'm curious about the voice of the women in this book, because even Nandi herself, who is somebody that I regard to be so intelligent, she's respected by her peers, she does not come to the forefront, you know, even in her interactions with Upila. In many ways she's on the back foot, she's constantly waiting for him to dictate to her, you know. Even Kacha is asking, will you marry me? It's almost like, will you make a good woman out of me? So the women in this book for me were very interesting.
Yeah, look, first of all, I think I agree with you. Let's go back to history, for instance. Xhosa culture is very patriarchal. We know that. You understand? But the funny thing is, the women, the Xhosa women, the queens, were always the ones who actually rule at the back of things. Like for instance, Unyaka could never do anything without his mom Sutu. Without Sutu. So Sutu was the one who was calling the Landaza the issues in all the time. I did not find any controlling figure in Makoma's life of a woman. You understand? But in Sandile and Nneka, I found it. You understand? But I just did not have enough space to pursue it, and then the book would have been like Sotu. I want a black woman preferably. But if it doesn't happen, I will do it myself. I want somebody to write a biography, Soto and Nongausa, and I would like it to be done by a black woman. You understand? I think they will have a better insight towards it than me. And then, and then, and so coming back to Opila and Nandi. Pila and Nandi Alma, they threatened to run away with this book. So I had to discipline them.
Yes.
I had to discipline them and cut it out because they threatened to take over the Makoma's story.
Yes.
You understand that? Because now, even me, when I was writing, their story now became much more interesting than the Makoma story. You understand? And then, despite the fact that I'm a realist, by a realist I mean I don't believe in mills and booms and all that stuff, happy endings. You understand? But the reason why I didn't give them a happy ending is because first of all I wanted to be realist, and second I wanted to cut them off so that they don't overwhelm the Makoma story.
Yes.
You understand? So I had to find a way to do that. I've almost every lady I speak about Nandi is very angry about justifiable, so about how Pila treated Nandi.
He's trashy.
But sometimes I say that you guys are biased also because you overlook Nandi's flaws.
Nandi's flaw was being too caring.
She was having an affair with her colleague, and then the things they talk about, she reveals them to their colleagues without Pilar's permission.
She was concerned. She spoke in confidence. The anger boiling in her face. I mean, you described it quite clearly. There was anger boiling in her face when her colleague made that comment.
But Pilar always saw it as a
betrayal.
Disloyalty,
Yes,
as a betrayal. And Pilar, you know, Pilar is hypersensitive. You understand?
Pilar's trashy. Pilar is trashy. Pilar he's a problematic fave, right?
Yeah.
Because
but it's a problem that attracts that man. Huh?
Yes, it was.
You understand? Especially these respectable men like myself. They don't see their faults. They don't see their own faults because they think just because perhaps I don't sleep around, then I'm perfect.
Yes.
They don't see.
So that's what I thought about Pila. I thought that Pila was a commentary on the nice guy and the problem with being a nice guy. Because Pila, in many ways, is a nice guy, but he is so trashy and problematic. Right? He doesn't hate Nandi. He's not really abusive per se, but he's narcissistic. He's self-absorbed. He almost demands that she center him. You know, so he'll go off, have the best time of his life with Makoma, and then come back to her and just expect her to be waiting for him. You know?
And like for instance, he writes that email that the most anger I've had with you is the time you told me that you slept with your colleague and all that stuff. And then but he didn't say it that time. Now he's using it as a weapon to justify what he has just done with Matt.
Matt is one of my favorite characters because Matt gave to Pila what so many men need to have, right? And I thought it was so interesting that the one woman who gets a lot of, not airtime, but who gets a lot of play is a woman who makes unpopular decisions, you know? So Pila has almost given up the security for her. And she makes a decision that, no, actually, you are not what I want.
I can do exactly what you yourself are capable to do. You see, in Matt, I needed a woman of independent means who behaves almost like Pila himself.
Yes,
You understand?
yes.
But I'm just going to look for my own interest here. So if my interest contracted your interest, that's your problem, not mine.
She was just like to him, keep the energy. Or the energy that you had when you left tonight, you had it, right? Just keep that energy. There's a contemporary question, which is also a historical question, that she posed in this book about land. You know? So in a time when we're having very powerful and potent questions about land, I was so overjoyed at the ways in which you reported how we were dispossessed as a country and as a people. Right? I think that there's been a lot of historical revisionism about the ways in which black people came to lose their land. And I think it's interesting that this book almost begins where Pila is participating in a question around land and almost ends in a very similar way. So it's like a historical consequence that is contemporary. You know? So I want us to talk about the land thing, the land. I felt very I don't know if I necessarily have the vocab for the ways in which there was an anger evoked in me about land and dispossession.
You are a perfect reader. Because people say, sometimes would say to me, the Broken River Tent is about the life and times of Malcolm. And I would like, okay, but the book is about land dispossession. You understand? Its major theme is about the land dispossession and its consequences. You understand? And only a person who has read it in detail like you would understand that. And if you noticed what I do in the book, I pay attention on the geographical detail.
Yes.
Because of places, you understand, to show how it was dispossessed from the original owner to what it is now. Do you understand? So I don't just name the name of the place. I locate it in a geographical map so that you see. Yesterday I was in this book club. Many of the ladies there come from the former Transkei. They're like, just to see how you know that land, and this is where I was born and all that stuff. Even myself, I did not know all these things you are talking about, and now I'll never be able to look at this place with the same eyes again because of this historical knowledge that I have. The part about how it starts, I have to congratulate my editor, who is Alison Laurie, because you've picked up, but it almost ends the same. I had that chapter actually, I put it at the end, that chapter. And then Alison was like, no, it has to be at the beginning because it describes what we're about to encounter, which is the character of Pila. Yes, but from that first chapter, you can see the character of Pila, the kind of person he is and all that stuff. So it prepares you. And then also, it warns you that here we're going to talk about land disposition because those riots in Hot Bay were about the land dispossession, and then there were the consequences of the land dispossession. And the funny thing is, in all the cities, most cities and towns, whether in Western Cape or Eastern Cape, it's still like that. You have colored people on the other end, the black people on the other end, and the fertile valley is where the rich white people stay. Yes. And Hot Bay is a microcosm of that, and I stay in Hot Bay. So you can see it, that nothing has changed basically, because that was my original thing. But okay, we've got this freedom, but we're not yet Uhuru.
Not yet Uhuru is like the theme. Like, sure, this book is so powerful because I'm so proud to see that there's a lot of like this new genre of historical African fiction, because you start this book, there's a quote in the blurb that talks about the responsibility of the writer to excavate the experience of the people who produced him, you know, and that in so many ways, that's James Baldwin, who's like Kafanolo's Bay, and it's so powerful that you chose that. So I am so grateful. This book is such a powerful commentary on both historical but contemporary issues. I think it's so powerful that you spoke about historical consequence. I think that we can't have conversations about the states in which black people find themselves in this country without discussing the historical events that have taken place, the dispossession, the utter landlessness, and what has happened to South Africans, you know. So I am very grateful. And at the Cheeky Natives, we've got this thing that we do, you know, in awarding our authors sort of things to say thank you for what they've done for us. So we don't give popcorn. We don't. No, those things are not useful. What we do give, which is particularly important for you, is we give land.
Oh, nice.
So based on how much we read the book, we apportion a piece of land. So from the Cheeky Natives, we've decided that for this book, we will apportion a piece of land in your home province, Algoa Bay.
Wow.
So you're going to have land in
Algoa Bay. Thank you.
And you're going to sit and you're going to write the second and the third part of what is a powerful story, you know?
You hear people at the Nelson Mandela Bay, that land is mine now.
This land is Mphuthumi.
I'm being responded now, I'm a more
So where can people get this book? How can people get hold of you? What's next for you?
This book is available on all major bookstores, exclusive, bargain, and you can get it at Take a Lot also. And everywhere good books are sold, you can get it. Even by some private booksellers that I can't remember now. But Tabiso and the Jakana are the best people to ask if you want it. But before I talk about this, we had we were going to open with a quote of Tom Morrison, but we realized when we were going to the printers that we hadn't asked permission from the publisher. Oh, that thing pained me because I really wanted that. But if ever this book will get into a second edition print, we will put it. Can I quote it? It's very short. It says, but this is from Toni Morrison. She recently died. You know, they straightened out the Mississippi River in places to make room for houses and livable acreage. Occasionally, the river floods these places. Floods is the word they use, but in fact, it is not flooding. It is the river remembering itself. And this is what I thought this book was all gonna be about. And then it is us, our people, remembering ourselves, because we were unfortunate enough that the organic progressing of our culture was disrupted by colonialism and apartheid. Now we're trying to remember ourselves and find our path anew. And then this is what I thought I would do. My ambition is a little bit ambitious, is to do a trilogy of this. And when I said that I wanted to do this as a frontier wars and the conflict. The second part, which I call the marked man, I wanted to look at the spiritual conflicts between the Western ones and the African one. And it will feature Van der Kemp was the first missionary to America, who landed where Tiosoga village. So he made a missionary there. It's a reason why Tiosoga was first sent to Edinburgh. So I'm going to be a little bit kinder this time around because I'm going to do it in a journal form. They both wrote journals and their journals are lost. You understand? So I'm trying to recreate the journals. And then of course at the end we'll have part 3 where it will be Pillar following on their footsteps in Netherlands, in Edinburgh, and then in the Cape. And we'll see what happens.
Thank you so much to Mphuthumi. We look forward not only to your latest works, but to hearing from more of you, and we look forward to seeing what more can be done to record ourselves and to excavate the work of our history. Thank you everybody for listening. We'll see you on the next episode of The Cheeky News.